Because we're just people who watch racing, we thought we might bring on somebody who had some real technical expertise. Because when you're talking about Cars the movie, you want to talk technical expertise. That's why we brought on Bozi Tatarevic. Did I get the name right?
Oh, that's perfect. That's I'm impressed.
Fantastic. Bozi, your own resume, you have a diverse resume when it comes to automotives, yes?
A little bit, yeah. I've done a few races here and there.
Yeah. Pit crew?
Yep.
Correct.
Yeah.
Commentator, podcaster, man of many talents. But first and foremost, I want to go ahead and just claim this spot on your resume. You are an expert on the movie Cars, because when we asked you to come on, we received in our inboxes a dossier on notes on Cars. Like, I'm talking 624 words about Cars, which is absolutely amazing. When did you first watch this movie?
So I was actually late to the scene with the movie. So when it first came out, I was in college doing sports and just other kind of activities. So I figured it's like a cartoon. It's not really for me, as a 21-year-old guy just out, doing whatever. So I didn't watch it until 2021. So in 2021, I've talked to different racers and stuff. And there were different professional drivers, mechanics, even engineers that are like, you have to watch this movie. And one of the biggest proponents actually was Raja Karuth. So he's a NASCAR Truck Series driver right now. And at the time, I think he was racing ARCA, maybe some other stuff. But we were doing Twitter Spaces, and it was kind of a running joke back and forth because he would make Cars references. And whenever he would do that, I would just kind of like stare and just try to figure out what's going on. And then he would tell me that he was 4 years old when he watched Cars and make me feel old. And we went back and forth. And eventually in the summer of 2021, I was on a long flight to California. I was like, I'll have to watch this.
Yeah. And when you did, and I will stop talking at this point, I promise. But when you watched it, before you did, how many drivers have watched this movie? Like all of them? Do all of the drivers at least have like a familiarity with the movie Cars? Like adults who might otherwise not?
I think the vast majority of racing drivers that I've met and worked with do. So as an example, the guys that I worked with on the Lexus RCF GT3 in IMSA, so people like Jack Hawksworth, Ben Barnicoat, and even Kyle Kirkwood, who also races an IndyCar, we were at a dinner at the Detroit GP like a couple of months ago, and that was like a 20-minute dinner conversation comparing Cars 1 and Cars 2 and whether Cars 2 stands up and is, one that should be considered at the level of Cars 1 and Cars 3. And it was like a whole thing into it. And these are guys that have won all over the world in multiple different racing series, have raced in IMSA, IndyCar, NASCAR, WEC, like all this other stuff. And this is what our dinner conversation is like. And people that were walking outside of the steakhouse watching drivers and mechanics sitting here probably thought we were talking about strategy or engineering or whatever else. No, it was Cars.
Wait, so what's the consensus? Does Cars 2 hold up? Do we have to watch Cars 2 now?
You're probably going to have to watch it because that's like the controversial one. Cars 2, it's very controversial. And at our table that evening, there was a bunch of us, and it was split about 50-50 of people that are like Cars 2 is as equally good as, Cars 1 and 3, where the rest were like Cars 2 it shouldn't be respected as such. So you'll have to watch that as a follow-up to decide what side you stand on.
Yeah, highly controversial, Jess. Good because it's multidisciplinary and there's other forms of racing represented, and bad because of a lot of other things. So, but again, I think that's a whole separate podcast that we can get to.
Okay, we won't get into Cars 2, but I do need to ask because Cars 1 came out in 2006, so it's been almost 20 years since the first movie came out. Are there any drivers that you've met that were like inspired to become race car drivers because of Cars?
The big proponent that partly got me to watch the movie Raja that I just mentioned. So he was inspired by Lightning McQueen. He had Lightning McQueen toys, and like he grew up around the Washington D.C. area, and like there's not a whole lot of racing directly there. But he's like, how can I attach to this as I grew up? And then he ended up as a teenager getting into iRacing, and eventually made his way into some of the support series in NASCAR. And then this year he entered. Last year he entered the NASCAR Truck Series full time, but he's now a NASCAR Truck Series winner, and he's going to start his first playoff run in the Truck Series, I think, in a couple of weeks. So it's pretty neat to see like that whole development cycle.
I'm going somewhere with this based on your notes. This is predominantly a Formula One podcast, and you say, well, why is a movie about NASCAR relevant here? You've given me one big brick of an answer, because this movie is an inspiration to people beyond NASCAR and into Formula One. And one piece of evidence is that is an actual piece of human flesh, like an actual piece of someone's skin, because there is an F1 mechanic who has a tattoo of Luigi the Mechanic, correct?
That is
Lightning McQueen's
correct.
mechanic.
So Alessandro Fusaro is the number one mechanic for Charles Leclerc. And he is like, what in the US is like the equivalent of the car chief. So he's like the main mechanic basically. And on the inside of his, I think it's his left bicep, he's got I think it's Guido that is tattooed on there, and but with a red paint job, to match Ferrari, of course. So he became insanely popular online because of that, and the popularity grew. People found him partly because of the tattoo, but then with the way F1 fandom works, people kind of clung onto him and started basically making these like kind of like thirsty videos of him just like doing stuff around the car.
Oh,
So
God.
they would like put these like, like this music behind it, and everybody would like, oh my God, who is he? I need to know more about him.
How would you like to ride home on a real cowboy? I got a 6-pack of cold ones on ice and my room is out all night, so you can scream my name as loud as you need to, sugar.
Hey, sexy lady, I like your flow. Your body's
And he's just this guy. He's married. He has a kid. He's just a mechanic. But because like people built this whole persona around him, like they started following him. And if you go on TikTok and type in Ferrari mechanic, Alessandro, you will see numerous videos about him. And he eventually had to like lock down his social media because people were sending him DMs and, leaving comments and all.
That doesn't sound
this
like
stuff.
TikTok at all.
Yeah, not at all. Yeah.
No.
But that's like how far it's grown. And it's like there's the connection there. But that's the thing is like I have friends that work in all kinds of racing series across the world, where there's stuff like here, with NASCAR or IMSA or IndyCar, or across the world in F1. And there's always stuff like that connects us. And it's fascinating for me just to see the similarities in talking about cars and how relevant it is to actual professional racing, is that we're all somewhat similar and end up kind of with the same ideas, and we can all connect on that. And for me personally, once I saw cars, like I actually had like a real world connection, because I'm an immigrant that came to the US and ended up, doing pit stops on a car of, because people would take a chance on me. And that's, just like in the movies with Luigi and Guido, they are immigrants that came to the US and somebody took a chance on them and they got to do pit stops in, one of the biggest races. So it's kind of cool to see that connection.
So the first Cars movie, there's cameos from Michael Schumacher and Mario Andretti, and I think there's probably other racers in there too that I'm forgetting right now. But has there been like a competition amongst drivers to like get make a cameo appearance in the Cars movies? Because then I saw that Lewis Hamilton was in the next Cars, which I haven't seen yet. So it's like, oh, Michael Schumacher did this, like now I've got to do it. Is that a thing?
I think there's probably some that are very much into it, and there's probably others that got it as part of their PR assignment for whatever week they have for whoever they were contracted to at the time. So that's I think the newer generation of drivers, so drivers that grew up were in their formative years as Cars 1 and Cars 2 came out, those drivers would happily be in have a cameo in some sequel if it came out. But I think it was kind of half and half, and there are a lot of drivers that I know that are like down to do anything that's fun, that helps, spread their brand, and enjoy being part of little fun facts for things like that.
The little fun facts are my favorite part of the film. What are some things that when you watch the movie, you go, oh, they know what they're talking about, or they knew someone who knew what they were talking about when they made this film?
I mean, a lot of it's just the small details. Like, even though, the pit stops and things like that are comical, like one of the examples is, I think I'm trying to remember the truck's name, the Lightning McQueen's truck.
Mac.
Now it's Mac.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Mac, during one of the pit stop scenes at the race, is holding a fuel can. So typically in the late 90s and early 2000s, a lot of NASCAR teams would double stint their truck driver, where they would drive the truck to the track, and then they would also be the fueler during the races. This is previous to kind of the recent trend of full-on college athletes becoming crew members.
Right.
So it was neat to see little details like that, like Mac holding a fuel can when they show up to be the pit crew, for Lightning McQueen at the end of the race. And there's little details like that. And then even little nods on, the people that are in the movie. So one of my favorite things, I think, is like Luigi's license plate. It says 44.5-10.8. And that's actually a reference to the GPS coordinates for Maranello, which is where the Ferrari factory is located. So somebody, I definitely didn't notice that on my own, but, read it later on. But somebody was like, hey, let's put this reference here because they're talking about the Ferraris. And I think that one of the most interesting things from those conversations is that even though we're almost 20 years later, some of them have become relevant again as Formula One has become popular in the United States. So when Lightning McQueen shows up and they say, oh, I only know the Ferraris because they only watch F1, that's something that I've experienced personally because I've been a crew member in IMSA and NASCAR, which are racing series based in the US. And with the popularity of F1, when somebody asks me what I do and I explain it to them, they're like, oh, I only know McLaren or Ferrari in F1. How does that compare? So typically it opens up a conversation for me to explain what I do. But I've seen now, even almost 20 years later, that conversation has now ended up in a whole different circle because F1's become so popular.